Tonight we enter a quiet possibility. What if the oldest stories were not childish myths, but memories of something humanity was never meant to fully understand? In the locked rooms of museums, in clay tablets dried by ancient hands, there are names that seem to rise from a world older than history itself. Not proof of monsters in the sky, not simple fantasy either. Something stranger lives in the space between record, ritual, and memory. Stay with this story until the end, and you'll not be given a loud answer. You'll be given something more useful, a path through the oldest shadows of civilization, where the Anunnaki, the first cities, and the hidden timeline of humankind begin to feel less like separate mysteries and more like fragments of one unfinished map. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows still around you, right where you are listening from and what time it is there, somewhere else. Someone may be hearing these same words beneath a different sky. Now let your mind settle. You are standing at the edge of southern Mesopotamia, long before glass towers, printed books, and electric light. The air is warm, the ground is pale with dust. Far away, reeds tremble beside slow brown water, and the river moves with the patience of something that has seen every empire rise and fall. Above you, the sky is immense. It does not feel empty, it feels watched. This is the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where some of the earliest known cities took form. Records confirm that places such as Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur became centres of writing, administration, worship, and trade. Clay tablets from these lands preserve contracts, hymns, royal lists, school exercises, and myths that still trouble the imagination. At Oxford, Yale, and other great centres of ancient study, scholars continue to examine these records with care. They do not treat them as simple fairy tales. They treat them as human documents shaped by politics, theology, fear, memory, and the need to explain why the world is the way it is. That is where the mystery begins, because the Sumerians did not describe their world as random. They imagined a structured universe, layered with powers, offices, duties, decrees, and divine decisions. Their gods did not simply float in golden clouds. They worked, argued, assigned tasks, built cities, judged kings, measured destinies, and sometimes withdrew into terrifying silence. Among these figures were the Anunnaki. The name has become heavy in modern imagination. It has been pulled into fringe theories, strange books, midnight conversations, and glowing screens full of confident claims. Some say they were ancient astronauts, some say they were genetic engineers, some say they were nothing more than divine symbols created by priestly minds. The truth is quieter. The Anunnaki appear in Mesopotamian tradition as powerful divine beings linked with authority, judgment, and the deep ordering of existence. Their role shifts across time, text, and city. In one context, they are great gods. In another, they seem connected to the underworld. In another, they belong to the vast machinery of fate. A scholarly debate remains open over how these traditions changed from early Sumerian religion into later Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian thought. The records are incomplete, the tablets are broken, the meanings have passed through many languages, kingdoms, and hands. That incompleteness matters. A broken tablet does not speak like a complete book. It whispers. A missing line can become a doorway. A damaged name can become a legend. A gap in the clay can become a space where fear enters and where imagination begins arranging shadows into figures. Still, the ancient scribes were not careless dreamers. They lived in cities ruled by calendars, granaries, canals, temple accounts, and legal agreements. They counted sheep. They recorded barley. They trained students with lists of signs until their wrists ached. Their world could be practical, exact, and deeply bureaucratic, and yet, inside that practical world, they preserved stories of creation. In those stories, humanity does not always appear as the glorious centre of everything. Sometimes human beings are presented as workers, servants, replacements, or creatures shaped to carry burdens once assigned to divine labourers. It is a humbling idea, not very flattering. Ancient people, apparently, did not always feel the need to make humanity look magnificent. There is a strange little tidbit here, the kind that feels almost too odd to survive by accident. Some Mesopotamian creation traditions speak of humans being formed from clay mixed with something divine. Sometimes connected with blood or essence, clay was everywhere in southern Mesopotamia. It built tablets, sealed jars, lined walls, and held memory itself. So when a scribe imagined humanity the shaped from clay, he was not choosing a random substance. He was choosing the material of his world, the material of records, the material that remembered. Perhaps that is the first hidden clue. Not that the story is literally true in every detail, not that a single tablet gives us secret science, but that the oldest civilizations understood human beings as made from earth and command, from labour and memory, from something low and something high. You can almost feel the discomfort in that idea. You're not standing at the beginning of history as a crowned creature. You're standing as a question. Why were we made? Who gave us purpose? Who benefits when people forget the stories that once explained their place beneath the stars? The phrase official history often sounds colder than it should. It suggests shelves, dates, maps, and careful labels beneath glass. Those things matter. Without them, every fantasy would dress itself as truth. Yet official history is also shaped by survival, or what survives is what gets burned into brick, copied by scribed or Mesi and buried safely, translated correctly, and valued by later hands. What did not survive may be just as important. You feel that now, beneath the ancient sky. The silence is not empty. It is crowded with missing voices. A temple rises in the distance, not yet the towering image of later imagination, but already commanding the plain. Its mud brick sides catch the last light. Priests move through courtyards, workers carry baskets, somewhere. A scribe presses a reed stylus into wet clay, making marks that will outlive kings. He cannot know you will be listening. He cannot know that thousands of years later, people will ask whether his world concealed a hidden timeline. He cannot know that the name Anunnaki will be lifted from scholarly dictionaries and carried into global mystery. He's only writing what he has been taught, what his teachers copied, what his temple preserved, what his city believed was worth remembering. That is how deception can begin, not always with a lie, sometimes with selection, sometimes with translation, sometimes with a conquest, sometimes with the simple decay of clay, the collapse of a roof, the fading of a language, or the quiet decision that one story is sacred while another is dangerous. And perhaps the great deception is not that someone hid one perfect answer. Perhaps the deeper deception is that humanity was taught to stop asking older questions. The river keeps moving. The reeds bend softly. Night gathers over the plain, and the first stars begin to appear like cold lamps above the dust. You breathe slowly. Somewhere inside the darkness, the oldest records wait. The dust of Sumer does not rise in a hurry. It lifts slowly from the plain, pale and fine, as if the earth itself is exhaling an old memory. You stand where the southern lands stretch toward the marshes, where river water once split into channels, pools, reed beds, and shining brown fields. The heat presses gently against your skin. It is not cruel yet. It is potent. In the distance, you hear water moving. That sound is the beginning of everything here. Not thunder, not iron, not the roar of armies, just water passing through mud, carrying silt from far mountains toward the lowlands where people learn to bargain with nature. Mesopotamia means the land between rivers, but the phrase almost sounds too clean. The actual place was not a neat drawing on a schoolroom map. It was a living puzzle of floods, canals, droughts, reeds, insects, fish, mud brick, salt, grain, labour, and prayer, and to survive here. People had to organise the landscape, and they had to read the river like a dangerous text. Records from excavated cities confirm that irrigation was central to early urban life in southern Mesopotamia. Fields needed water at the right time, canals needed maintenance, and communities needed leaders capable of coordinating labour. Major university studies of early cities often return to the same point. Civilization here did not simply appear because people had bright ideas. It grew from pressure, cooperation, need, and risk. That is a quieter kind of miracle. You walk along a canal bank at dusk. The mud is cracked at the edges, but still dark where water has touched it. Your sandals press into soft ground. A crane lifts from the reeds, and its wings move through the amber air with solemn grace. Nearby, a child carries a small basket. An older woman shakes grain from a woven tray. Somewhere behind a wall, a donkey complains with impressive confidence. The ancient world was mysterious, yes, but it was also practical. Someone had to bake bread, someone had to patch roofs, someone had to count jars, mend nets, cut reeds, haul bricks, and argue about missing goats. Sacred history was not floating above ordinary life, it was pressed into it, like a seal pushed into wet clay. This is what makes Sumer so compelling. Its gods were not distant decorations. They belonged to cities, temples, crops, storms, kingship, to law, fertility, writing, wisdom, and the dangerous balance of existence. A city was not only a place where people lived, it was a sacred machine, a human settlement tied to divine authority. At Eridu, later tradition remembered a very ancient foundation. At Uruk, walls and temples grew into symbols of urban power. At Nippur, the cult of Enlil gave the city deep religious importance. At royal tombs and temple remains would one day astonish excavators with evidence of wealth, craftsmanship, and social hierarchy. But at ground level, you feel something simpler. Mud. Everything begins with mud here. Mud forms the bricks. Mud holds the canals. Mud becomes the tablet. Mud receives the reed stylus. Mud hardens in the sun and turns a passing thought into a surviving record. In a land without great forests or endless stone, clay becomes architecture, paperwork, memory, and sometimes destiny. A strange tidbit lingers in this clay world. Some ancient builders stamped bricks with royal names, almost like signatures left inside the walls of time. A king could die, a dynasty could vanish, and still his name might remain hidden in the body of a temple, waiting for a future hand to find it. Not exactly subtle behaviour from rulers, but kings have rarely been famous for modesty. The wind moves across the plain. You smell reeds, damp earth, smoke, and animals. Evening fires have begun. The air carries a faint sweetness from date palms, mixed with the sharper scent of river mud. Beyond the houses, the temple platform rises with a severe calm. It does not need to shout. Its height is enough. People look toward it because it gathers meaning. There, offerings are made. There, officials manage resources. There, scribes learn the marks that separate memory from disappearance. The temple is spiritual, economic, administrative, and theatrical all at once. It is a place where grain can become tribute, labour can become duty, and a city can imagine itself noticed by heaven. Scholars continue to debate how much power early temples held compared with palaces and household networks. Some readings emphasize temple institutions as central engines of early urban life. Others argue for a more mixed and changing structure, where authority moved between priests, rulers, families, and local administrators. The debate matters because it shapes the hidden question: who controlled memory? Not only who ruled, not only who prayed, who decided which stories were copied, which names were preserved, which events became sacred, and which vanished like footprints in dry dust. In Sumer, memory required work. A tablet had to be prepared, written, tried, stored, taught, recopied, and understood. Nothing about that process was accidental. A society that records sheep and barley can also record power. A society that records hymns can also guide belief. So you begin to sense how an ancient landscape might hide a timeline without needing a locked vault. The hiding could happen through survival itself. Clay preserves some voices and loses others. Fire destroys a house, but sometimes bakes tablets harder. Floodwater erases walls, but may bury archives safely beneath layers of silt. Ruin can be both destruction and protection. That is unsettling. The land is not silent because nothing happened. It is silent because too much happened, and only fragments remain. As night gathers, workers return from the fields. Their bodies are tired. Their hands smell of grain, rope, water, and animals. Above them, the sky deepens into blue-black clarity. Stars appear one by one, sharp and remote. In this world, the heavens do not look decorative. They look organized. They look like a script too large to read. You can understand why ancient people imagined order above them. The rivers could betray them. Crops could fail. Walls could collapse. Children could fall ill. Kings could demand too much. Yet the stars returned in patterns, season after season, silent and exact. In that regular sky, a city might see reassurance. It might also see command. The Anunnaki belong to this kind of world. Not a world of simple fantasy, but a world where earth, water, labour, kingship, and sky were woven together. A world where the unseen was not separate from daily life. It moved through contracts, harvests, temple rites, and stories whispered under cooling roofs, and you stand in the dust as the last light leaves the canal. Somewhere, a scribe smooths a tablet with his palm. Somewhere, a priest watches smoke rise. Somewhere, an old store waits for the pressure of a reed. The tablets do not look powerful at first. They are small, brown, cracked, and often plain enough to be mistaken for broken earth. Some fit easily in the palm. Some are shaped like little pillows of clay, dried by sun, hardened by fire, or buried by accident beneath fallen walls. Their edges are chipped. Their lines are crowded. Their valence feels almost rude. And yet they remember. You lean closer to one of them in your imagination, and the room around you grows dim. The tablet rests beneath soft museum light. Its surface is marked by wedge-shaped impressions, each one pressed by a reed stylus into wet clay thousands of years ago. A hand moved there once, a living hand, warm, trained, impatient, perhaps tired. That hand did not know it was speaking to you. Cuneiform is one of the oldest known writing systems, first developed in southern Mesopotamia for practical record keeping. Scholars at places such as the University of Chicago, Oxford, and the British Museum have spent generations studying these signs because they preserve not only myth and poetry, but also ordinary human life. Beer rations or grain loans, temple accounts, school punishments, legal disputes. Very glamorous, obviously. Yet this is precisely what makes the tablets trustworthy in a strange way. They do not come from a world that only dreamed. They come from a world that counted. The same civilization that preserved stories of divine beings also tracked sheep, workers, dates, jars, land boundaries, and silver. Its imagination lived beside administration. That closeness is important. Because when ancient scribes wrote of gods shaping humanity, assigning kingship, and arranging cosmic order, they were not writing from a culture without structure. They understood systems. They understood hierarchy. They understood labour. They understood that power was maintained through records. So when their myths speak of divine councils, decrees, and duties, the language feels familiar. Heaven resembles a great administration. The gods behave like distant rulers with responsibilities, privileges, arguments, and servants. Creation becomes not just a miracle, but a decision made inside an ordered realm. The Anunnaki emerge from this world of records like figures seen through smoke. They are not always described in one fixed way. Their identity shifts across periods and traditions. In some texts, they appear as great gods connected with judgment. In others, they are linked with the underworld or with a larger assembly of divine powers. They are not simple characters in a neat storybook. They are older than neatness. A quiet scholarly debate remains over how early Sumerian ideas about divine groups changed when later Akkadian and Babylonian scribes copied, translated, and reimagined them. Some specialists see continuity, others see layers of reinterpretation. The clay does not give one clean answer. It gives fragments. You can feel those fragments under your fingertips. A line begins clearly, then breaks away. A name appears, then vanishes into damage. A phrase survives without its missing beginning. A myth reaches for explanation, but the tablet ends before comfort arrives. That is where the hidden timeline begins to breathe. Not because every broken sentence proves a secret. Broken things do not automatically become revelations, but because ancient memory is not preserved evenly. Some stories survive in many copies, others survive in one damaged piece. Some may have vanished completely when libraries burned, canals shifted, or cities fell into dust. A single lost tablet could change the shape of a tradition. That thought is small but unsettling. In temple archives, scribes copied older material for reasons that were not always neutral. Some texts trained students, some served rituals, some honoured gods, some strengthened royal claims, some preserved prestigious knowledge from earlier ages. Copying was not only preservation, it was selection. A scribe chooses. He chooses what matters enough to repeat. His teacher chooses what counts as wisdom. His temple chooses what belongs in its memory. His king may prefer certain stories over others. His city may magnify its own god and soften the glory of a rival. This is not a wild conspiracy, it is how culture works. Still, over centuries, selection can feel like concealment, not because one hidden hand controls everything, but because memory narrows as it travels. A river spreads through marshes, then becomes channels, then becomes one line drawn on a map. Something similar happens to history. The tablets that remember also forget. You sit now in the imagined schoolroom of an ancient scribe. The walls are mud brick. The floor is swept, but never perfectly clean. Reed styluses lie nearby. A young student bends over wet clay, copying signs again and again. His teacher watches with the ancient expression of someone disappointed by handwriting. The student appends lists of signs, lists of words, lists of professions, animals, cities, woods, stones, gods, and stars. Mesopotamian education loved lists because lists make the world seem manageable. When something can be named, arranged, and repeated, it feels less wild. There is a curious tidbit in these school tablets. Some students copied proverbs and modelled dialogues that reveal dry humour, frustration, and little complaints about discipline. Even in the shadow of sacred temples, children were apparently still children, and teachers were still teachers. History becomes more real when it smiles. But then the smile fades. Among these records are myths that carry a heavier feeling. They speak of beginnings, floods, divine labour, kingship descending from heaven, and humans placed into a world already ruled by powers older than themselves. The stories do not ask whether humanity is alone. They assume humanity is not the first intelligence in the room. That assumption changes everything. You are not watching people invent gods as decorative symbols. You're watching a civilization organize its deepest anxieties into narrative. Why must humans work? Why do cities need rulers? Why do offerings matter? Why are the gods distant, demanding, and sometimes silent? The answers are stored in clay. Perhaps the most haunting idea is that writing itself may have altered memory. Oral stories flow and change with each telling. Written stories harden, they gain authority. A clay tablet can freeze one version of a myth while many other versions die unheard. So when modern readers approach the tablets, they may be meeting not the whole ancient imagination, but the surviving branch of a much larger forest. The lost branches remain invisible. You look again at the tablet under soft light. It no longer seems small. It seems like a locked gate, not because it refuses to speak, but because it speaks in a voice damaged by time. Every wedge is a doorway. Every crack is a warning. The clay remembers enough to disturb you, not enough to let you rest completely. Official history often begins with a tidy line. It offers you a date, a place, a map, and a confident sentence. Civilization began here. Writing appeared there. Cities formed in this period. Kingship developed from these institutions. The words are useful, and they are not foolish. Without them, the past would dissolve into mist. Yet the ancient world rarely moves in tidy lines. It spreads like water through soil. It gathers in low places. It disappears underground, then rises again, somewhere unexpected. Human memory works in the same way. A custom may survive long after its first meaning is forgotten. A sacred name may remain after the people who first whispered it have vanished. A myth may carry the shape of an event whose details are gone forever. So you find yourself standing at the edge of official history, looking into the darkness beneath it. The earliest Sumerian cities did not rise from nothing. Archaeology shows long development across many centuries in Mesopotamia, from farming villages and temple centres to dense urban life. Excavations at sites such as Eridu, Ubaid settlements, and later Uruk reveal gradual changes in architecture, pottery, trade, social organisation, and ritual practice. This matters because beginnings are often older than their labels. By the time writing appears clearly on clay tablets, people have already been building, burying, worshipping, irrigating, treading, and remembering for a very long while. Writing did not create memory, it caught memory in a net, and the net had many holes. You walk now through a settlement not yet grand enough to be called a city. The houses are low. The walls are made of mud brick. Smoke curls from cooking fires in the quiet morning. Someone grinds grain on a stone slab, and the sound is steady, rough, almost hypnotic. A dog sleeps near a doorway, pretending not to watch everything. There are no monumental inscriptions here. No royal boasting, no carved victory scenes, no neat historical explanation, only people living inside of a world already filled with meaning. A burial beneath a floor, a small figurine near a hearth, a painted bowl, a shrine rebuilt in the same place again and again. These things do not speak loudly in bears, but they suggest continuity, at sites linked with the Ubaid period. Archaeologists have found evidence of social complexity long before the great cities of historical Sumer. Temples grew through repeated rebuilding. Communities shared styles across wide regions. Trade networks carried materials beyond local landscapes. These are not signs of a simple world waiting passively for civilization to begin. They are signs of depth. There is a quirky and unsettling tidbit from this early horizon. Some small figurines from Mesopotamian contexts have strangely elongated faces, narrow eyes, and unusual bodies. Most scholars interpret them through ritual, artistic or symbolic frameworks. Modern fringe writers, naturally, have stared at them and decided they look like visitors from somewhere very inconvenient. The serious answer is less theatrical, but the feeling remains. When ancient objects do not fit modern expectations, imagination enters the room. It sits down quietly. It does not always behave. A scholarly debate continues over how directly later Sumerian religious ideas grew from these earlier prehistoric traditions. Some researchers emphasize strong continuity in temple life and sacred space. Others warn that later written myths cannot be safely projected backward onto silent prehistoric objects. The stones, figurines, and buildings remain patient, refusing to settle every argument. That refusal is valuable. It reminds you that history is not only what is known, it is also the disciplined study of what cannot yet be known. The honest historian does not fill every gap with certainty. The dreamer does, the propagandist does, the frightened mind does. Still, gaps have gravity. They pull at you. Imagine generations passing in this ancient settlement. A child learns the names of powers from her grandmother. The grandmother learned them from someone whose own grandmother lived near a different river bend. The names change. The stories shift. A god becomes greater. A spirit becomes local. A flood becomes moral. A memory becomes ritual. Long before recorded history, the foundations of recorded thought may already be forming. That is the hidden timeline. Not as a secret chart locked under a temple, but as a long descent of memory from mouth to mouth, house to house, shrine to shrine. Official history catches only the upper branches. The roots remain beneath the soil. You feel those roots in the Sibyllabus. They lie under the first tablets. They lie under the first walls of Uruk. They lie under the temple platforms that later scribes believed had always belonged to the gods. Every ancient city is built upon an older place, an older habit, an older fear, an older hope. This is why the Anunnaki question does not begin with the name Anunnakis. It begins with the human urge to explain order. It begins with the discovery that grain grows if water is guided. It begins with the realization that a canal needs command, that a harvest needs calculation, that a community needs stories powerful enough to make labor feel sacred. A society does not build temples merely because it has spare time. Temples rise where people feel dependence. They rise where human effort meets uncertainty. They rise where weather, fertility, death, and authority must be negotiated through ritual. They rise when the world feels alive with unseen structure. Perhaps the earliest deception was never a single act of hiding. Perhaps it was the later habit of pretending that history begins only when people start writing things down for us to read comfortably. That is a very modern vanity. You look across the plain, and the settlement grows dim in evening light. The roofs are low and rounded. The smell of ash lingers near doorways. A child is called inside. Someone closes a reed gate. Above the houses, the stars return with their old authority. No scribe records is night. What always delays. No king claims it. No museum label can fully restore it. Yet something is happening here. Something slow and essential. People are learning how to live inside patterns. They are learning how to connect earth and sky, labour and worship, hunger and offering, fear and explanation. They are preparing the mental world in which later myths will become possible. Official history will arrive with tablets, but memory is already awake. The silent architects do not arrive with thunder. They enter the ancient imagination through order, duty, and distance. You do not see them walking openly through their marketplace, scattering miracles like coins. You feel them in the structure of the world, in the rank of gods, in the fate of kings, in the idea that heaven itself may have offices, councils, laws, and hidden rooms. The Anunnaki are most unsettling when they are quiet, not because they're easy to define, but because they resist definition. Their name moves through Mesopotamian religion like a shadow crossing many walls. In some traditions, they stand among the great divine powers. In others, they gather her in judgment, underworld authority, or the decrees that hold existence together. They are not merely characters. They are a system. You imagine a temple court at night, washed by moonlight and cooled by desert wind. Kisto, the daytime noise has faded. No merchants shout, no animals complain, no worker drags baskets across the courtyard. Only the temple remains awake, broad and pale under the stars. A priest steps softly across the paving. He carries oil, water, incense, and a memory older than his own family. His work is not entertainment, it is maintenance. The world, in his mind, must be tended. The divine order must be honoured. Ritual is not decoration, ritual is repair. That thought brings the Anunnaki closer. In many Mesopotamian texts, divine beings are connected with the organisation of reality. The gods assign roles, judge conduct, grant kingship, send disaster, protect cities, and withdraw favour. Museums and just universities that preserve cuneiform collections often describe Mesopotamian religion as deeply tied to civic order, political legitimacy, and sacred duty. The Anunnaki belong to the atmosphere of rank and command. A king does not rule alone. He rules beneath divine authority. A city does not stand alone. It belongs to a patron power. A law is not merely useful, it reflects a cosmos that ancient people believed was already structured. In such a world, the Anunnaki can seem like invisible administrators behind the curtain of existence. That is where the fringe imagination finds its doorway. Some modern writers claim that the Anunnaki were not gods at all, but physical beings reborn from another world. They point toward old stories of beings descending, creating humans, assigning labour and ruling through selected kings. The argument is dramatic, and it has travelled far through books, videos, and late-night curiosity. It is a strange little tidbit that the name Anunnaki has become more famous in modern mystery culture than many far clearer figures from Mesopotamian literature. A being can be poorly understood and still become enormous in the modern mind. Sometimes uncertainty has better marketing than certainty. The careful historian steps more slowly. Ancient texts must first be read within their own world. Divine descent does not automatically mean spacecraft. Heavenly kingship does not automatically mean technology. Creation from clay does not automatically mean genetic engineering. These ideas may reveal modern desire as much as ancient meaning, and yet the question remains interesting. Why did the oldest urban civilizations imagine authority as something descending from above? Why did they place the origin of kingship outside ordinary human agreement? Why did they describe humanity as part of a larger managed order, not as a free accident wandering under empty stars? A debate remains active among scholars over how Mesopotamian myths functioned within society. Some see them as theology, explaining divine power and ritual duty. Some read them as political language, making hierarchy feel ancient and sacred. Others treat them as inherited symbolic memory, layered across generations whose earlier sources are lost. The clay does not choose one answer for you. It lets several stand in the dark. You move through that darkness now, past walls built from sun-dried brick. The temple interior smells of oil, wool, smoke, and old clay. A lamp trembles in a niche. Its flame bends when the door curtain moves. The air is thick, but not frightening. It is solemn. Somewhere nearby, a statue of a god stands in dimness. To modernize, it is an object. To ancient worshippers, it could become a presence. It received food, clothing, washing, fragrance, and music, and honour. The boundary between material image and divine reality was not coldly separated. Care for the statue meant care for the relationship between city and deity. This is not primitive confusion. It is a different grammar of reality. The people of Mesopotamia lived with a strong sense that visible things could carry invisible force. A sealed tablet could represent a contract. A royal inscription could extend power through time. A ritual object could hold sacred meaning. A statue could become more than stone or wood. In that grammar, the Anunnaki are not random invention. They express a world where power has layers. At the top are cosmic powers. Beneath them are city gods, kings, priests, scribes, workers, families, and the dead. Every layer depends on another. Every duty connects to a higher command. The whole universe feels like a great Ozoi, vast and difficult to please. You hear the quiet sarcasm in that. Humanity invented bureaucracy, then imagined heaven had already perfected it. Still, the idea has emotional force. If life is full of toil, maybe toil has meaning. If kings demand obedience, maybe kingship has divine origin. If cities require endless labour, maybe that labour continues a cosmic assignment begun in an age no living person remembers. The Anunnaki become the architects of that assignment. Not builders with hammers in their hands, but designers of hierarchy, fate, and obligation. They stand at the edge of the known mythic world, shaping the atmosphere in which humanity understands itself. They do not need to speak often. Their silence gives them weight. Perhaps that silence is why they endure. A fully explained God becomes smaller. A mysterious divine assembly remains wide enough to hold fear, hope, suspicion, and longing. The Anunnaki survive in fragments because fragments invite return. You keep looking because the outline is incomplete. The night deepened over the temple. The priest pours water into a basin. The lamp flame steadies. Far beyond the city wall, the plain opens into darkness. Stars look down with their cold precision, and the roofline cuts a black shape across the sky. You feel the old question forming without sound. Were the Anunnaki remembered as gods because they were symbols of order, or because order itself once wore a faith? The temple gives no answer. It only stands. The first human design begins with a troubling simplicity. Not glory, not conquest, not a crowned creature stepping proudly into sunlight. In the older Mesopotamian imagination, humanity often enters the story through labour. You are not placed in a garden merely to admire the flowers. You are placed into a world that already has work waiting. The thought is quiet, but it changes everything. You stand in the dim edge of an ancient workyard, where baskets lean against a wall and clay clings to tired feet, and the morning is still grey. Smoke rises from low houses. A few workers move towards the canal, their shoulders bent beneath tools, rope, and habit. No one speaks much yet. The day has begun before the sun has fully arrived. This is not a scene of myth alone. It's also the basic truth of early civilization. Cities needed labour every day. Canals needed clearing. Fields needed planting. Bricks needed moulding. Grain needed storage. Animals needed watching. Temples needed offerings. The sacred world rested on human backs. Ancient records from Mesopotamia preserve administrative systems that counted workers, rations, tasks, and deliveries with astonishing care. Scholars from major universities have long noted that early writing grew strongly from economic management. Before literature filled tablets with kings and gods, many tablets were busy with grain, sheep, labour teams, and accounts. The gods had poetry. The accountants had everything else. This matters because the myths do not float above daily reality. They transform daily reality into sacred explanation. If people spent their lives hauling earth, cutting reeds, and maintaining canals, then a creation story might ask a painful question. Why must humans carry burdens at all? Some Mesopotamian traditions answer with unsettling theme. They imagine a time when lower divine beings laboured for higher gods. The work became heavy, the complaint rose, a solution was needed. Humanity was shaped to take over the burden, to maintain the world, to serve the gods, and to keep the cosmic household functioning. That is not a flattering origin. It is also strangely honest. You feel the rough handle of a basket against your palm. It bites softly into the skin. Mud cakes beneath your nails. The canal smells of damp clay, reeds, fish, and heat not yet fully awake. Around you, other bodies move in rhythm, each one part of a system too large for any single worker to see. A creation myth built from this world would not ask whether work is noble. It would ask who assigned it. In the tale often called a trachasis by modern scholars, humanity is created to relieve divine labour. In related traditions, divine blood or essence may be mixed with clay. In another composition, the shaping of humans becomes a scene of craft, argument, and divine skill. The details vary. The unease remains. Clay is the perfect material for such a story. It is low, common, and everywhere, yet clay can become a tablet, a brick, a bowl, a seal, a figurine, or a city wall. It is humble until a hand gives it form. It is saint until a stylus gives it memory. You can see why humanity might be imagined this way. A body from earth, a purpose from command, a breath from elsewhere, a life caught between mud and sky. There is a fringe tidbit that modern mystery writers adore. They often describe this creation as an ancient memory of genetic engineering, as though the clay were a laboratory bench and the divine essence were biological code. It is a bold image, and it walks into the room wearing very shiny shoes. The careful reading is less certain. Ancient people used symbols from their world. Clay, blood, breath, and divine speech were powerful images of making. They may express ritual thought, social hierarchy, mortality, sacred dependence, or all of these together. The myth does not need modern science to feel disturbing. Still, the symbolic force is unusually strong. A scholarly debate continues over how these creation stories should be understood. Some researchers treat them mainly as theology about divine service. Others see social ideology, justifying human labour and class order. Some compare them with later traditions about creation, flood, and sacred rebellion across the ancient Near East. The question remains open, and that openness is useful. It keeps the story from becoming too simple. If humanity was imagined as designed for service, then hidden history may not concern a single secret event. It may concern the way civilization taught people to accept their place. The myth tells the worker that labour is older than kings, older than cities, older than remembered time. It reaches back into the world of the gods. That's powerful. A ruler who commands your body is strong. A story that commands your meaning is stronger. You walk now through a temple storage room. The air is cool compared with the courtyard. Jars stand against the wall. Sealed containers hold oil, dates, grain, and offerings. A scribe checks a tablet and marks a quantity with careful pressure. Each sign is small, but together they form an invisible net. Here, bodies become numbers. A worker receives grain, a team clears a canal, a ration is reduced, a delivery is recorded. Human life passes through clay, measured and preserved. The system seems ordinary until you notice how closely it resembles the cosmic order described in myth. Above, the gods assign destiny. Below, officials assign labour. Perhaps the first human design was not only a mythic explanation of origin, perhaps it was also a mirror of society, showing people the structure they already lived aside. The heavens became a vast version of the temple. The temple became a small version of the heavens. You pause in the doorway. Outside, sunlight has spread across the yard. Dust shines in the air like powdered gold. A woman lifts a basket. A boy carries water. An older man straightens slowly, one hand pressed against his back. No one looks divine, but everyone is sustaining something larger than themselves. The mystery deepens because the story is not entirely cruel. If humans were created for labour, they were also created as necessary beings. Without them, offerings stop, cities fail, temples fall silent, fields dry, songs vanish. The gods may command, but humanity keeps the world moving. That is the strange dignity hidden inside the burden. You are made from clay, but clay remembers. You're assigned work, but when work becomes civilization. You're placed beneath powers, but your hands build the houses where those powers are honoured. Even the great temples rise brick by brick through human effort. No divine plan becomes visible unless someone carries the mud. This may be the oldest human paradox. To be small yet essential. To be shaped yet shaping. To serve a system yet leave marks that outlive the system itself. The canal glimmers in the growing heat. The baskets move. The tablets dry. Somewhere, a myth takes form, trying to explain why the day begins with labour and why the night ends with prayer. And in the space between clay and command, humanity appears. The cities rise from the plain like decisions made in brick. They do not appear gentle from a distance. Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur seem to gather the horizon around themselves, pulling fields, canals, workers, animals, gods, and stories into their gravity. You approach them through dust and heat, with the river behind you and the smell of baked clay ahead. A city is never only a city, it is a memory trap. Its walls hold footsteps, its streets preserve habits, its temples gather offerings, fears, songs, and official silence. Beneath every courtyard lies an older layer, and beneath that layer another one waits in compressed darkness. The ancient city does not simply grow upward, it buries itself while it lives. You enter Uruk near evening, when the light turns copper against mud brick. The streets are narrow in places, wider near ceremonial spaces. People move with the focused weariness of a world without machines. A potter carries vessels stacked with careful balance. A woman passes with wool tucked beneath one arm. A scribe hurries past, pretending that his business is too important for eye contact. Some things never change. Uruk is among the most important early urban centres known from ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeology confirms that by the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, it had developed monumental architecture, administrative system, craft specialization, and extensive influence across the region. It stands as one of humanity's earliest great experiments in urban life. But to stand inside it is not to read a textbook. It is to feel density. A village breathes outward. A city breathes inward. Everything presses closer. The houses, the workers, the storerooms, the officials, the shrines, the rumours, the debts, the smells, fish, smoke, wool, sweat, oil, beer, clay, and grain all mix in the hot air until civilization itself seems to have a scent. At the heart of such a city, the temple complex rises. It does not rise merely for beauty. It organizes attention. Its height changes the way people look at the sky. Its courtyards gather movement. Its storerooms gather wealth. Its rituals gather meaning. A temple is a place where the city explains itself to itself. In Eridu, tradition later remembered one of the most ancient sacred centres. Excavations revealed successive temple levels, each built above earlier structures. As if generations kept returning to the same sacred point, the place became layered with reverence, not because one building survived untouched, but because rebuilding itself became a form of memory. That is a powerful thing. To rebuild in the same place is to say the past is not finished. A quirky tidbit appears in the mud brick logic of these cities. Because bricks decay, crack, and melt back into earth, Mesopotamian builders often had to renew major structures again and again, so a temple might look eternal in meaning while being physically repaired like an old roof. Sacred permanence required very practical maintenance. There is something quietly funny about that. Even the doorway to heaven needed patchwork. In Nippur, the sacred atmosphere thickens. This city held great religious importance because of Enlil, one of the highest gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Kings from different dynasties sought legitimacy there, and scribal traditions connected Nippur with learning, theology, and authority. And here, you sense how a city can become more than political territory. It becomes a seal of approval. A ruler may command soldiers, collect tribute, and carve his name into stone, but if sacred memory does not recognize him, his power feels thinner. Ancient kings understood this. They built temples, restored shrines, donated offerings, and wrapped their rule in divine language, not because they were always pious in a soft modern sense, but because legitimacy needed the gods like fields needed water. The open scholarly debate concerns how far temple institutions shaped early city government. Some researchers emphasize temples as central engines of labor, storage, and administration. Others place more weight on household, councils, local elites, and palace power as cities changed over time. The evidence shifts from site to site, and the ancient streets refuse to become one simple theory. This uncertainty is not weakness. It is texture. The secret of these cities is not that a hidden chamber contains a single forbidden tablet. The deeper secret is that the city itself functions like a tablet. Its streets are lines, its walls are signs, its temple platforms are raised sentences written in brick. To read a city, you must move through it slowly. You pass into a storage court where jars stand in rows. Each jar holds something counted: grain, oil, dates, beer, wool. Each seal impression marks control. Each door suggests permission. Each official gesture tells you that civilization is not only the birth of culture, it is also the birth of management. That word feels too plain, but it is enormous. Management decides who eats first, who works where, who brings offerings, who receives rations, who owes service, who records the debt, who interprets the will of the gods when the harvest fails. A city built on secrets does not always hide them underground. Sometimes it hides them in routine. The worker sees the basket, not the system. The farmer sees the canal, not the cosmic order attached to it. The child sees the temple, not the long chain of belief that makes everyone bow their head at the right moment. Yet the structure is everywhere. At night, Uruk changes. The day's heat withdraws from the walls. The city cools slowly, like a sleeping animal. Lamps glow behind doorways. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. Above the roofs, stars gather in a sky so clear that the heavens seem built from deliberate marks. You look toward the temple platform. It stands between earth and the unreachable dark, not touching the stars detours, but teaching the city how to imagine them. Beneath it lie older floors, older bricks, older offerings, older names. The visible structure is only the latest skin of a much deeper body. Perhaps that is why ancient cities feel haunted. They are not haunted only by the dead, they are haunted by earlier versions of themselves. Every generation builds over another, sometimes honouring it, sometimes erasing it, sometimes not knowing the difference. If there was a hidden timeline, the cities kept it in layers. Not in one clean record. In buried foundations, in repeated shrine plans, in temple names copied by tired scribes, in myths attached to places already ancient when the stories were written, in royal claims that reached backward because power always wants an older ancestor. The Anunnaki belong naturally to this layered world. They are not floating in empty myth. They stand behind cities where hierarchy becomes sacred, where architecture teaches obedience, where memory is stored in clay and brick. They are the unseen order behind the visible order, the quiet architecture behind the architecture. You walk out through a gate as night settles over the fields. Behind you, the city remains awake in fragments, a lamp in a temple, a murmur in a courtyard, a sealed jar in storage, a wet tablet drying beside a wall. The secrets are not dramatic, they are patient. That is why they survive. The old kings stand in a line too long for comfort. Their names come down through clay like figures glimpsed through deep water. Some are clear, some are strange, some feel human enough. Others seem to belong to a world where time itself had different habits, and its reign could stretch across thousands of years without apology. You sit in the hush of an archive room, where a tablet rests beneath careful light. Its lines preserve a list of rulers, cities, dynasties, and reigns. At first it appears administrative, almost dry, then the numbers begin to widen. A king rules for 28,800 years. Another rules for 36,000 years. Another city receives kingship, then loses it. The silence becomes heavier. The Sumerian king list is one of the most fascinating documents from ancient Mesopotamia. Scholars at major institutions have studied its copies and variants for generations, recognizing it as a political and literary text that links kingship with divine order, city power, and deep antiquity. It is not a modern history book. That is important. It does not arrange the past with the cautious discipline expected in a university seminar. It presents kingship as something that descends from heaven, moves from city to city, and survives through cycles of rule, collapse, and restoration. It is history, theology, propaganda, and memory braided together. The braid is beautiful. Beautiful. It's also difficult to untangle. You look at those impossible reigns and feel the mind searching for explanations. Were the numbers symbolic? Were they sacred mathematics? Were they signs of divine status? Were they copied from older traditions that measured time differently? Or were they meant to make early kings feel almost superhuman? A scholarly debate remains open over how to interpret these vast reign lengths. Some researchers see them as mythic exaggeration linked with royal prestige. Others explore numerological patterns, scribal traditions, and political theology. Few compare them with broader ancient traditions about long-lived ancestors and primeval rulers. The tablet does not soften the mystery, it sharpens it. The strangest line is not only that kings ruled for unimaginable spans, it is that kingship itself is said to have descended from heaven. Not merely invented, not agreed upon by villagers sitting politely in a circle, descended, given, installed from above. That image matters deep. In this view, power is not born from human convenience. It arrives as a sacred institution, entrusted to cities in sequence. One city holds it, then another, then another. History becomes a transfer of divine authority across the plain. You can almost see the procession. Eridu receives kingship, then Bad Tibira, then Larak, then Sippar, then Shuruppak. The names move like lamps through darkness. Some are known from archaeology, some remain more elusive, some carry a sound that feels half geographical, half dream. A quirky tidbit waits inside this old list. The number of antediluvian kings is often given as 8 in surviving traditions, and their combined reigns can total hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient scribes were not shy. When they wanted deep time, they opened the gates completely. Modern readers may smile at this, but ancient exaggeration was not random silliness. Enormous numbers could express sacred distance, lost authority, and a world unlike the present. They could tell the listener that these rulers belonged to a time beyond ordinary measurement. Not every truth is carried by literal countings. You imagine a scribe copying the list in a dim schoolroom. He does not pause to laugh at the numbers. His reed stylus presses each sign with care. The past he copies is not a joke to him. It is part of the architecture of kingship. For him, the early kings are not simply old, they are foundational. The list leads toward the flood, that great dividing line in Mesopotamian memory. The world before the flood feels immense, stretched, almost dreamlike. The world after it becomes closer, sharper, more recognizably human. The flood does not merely destroy, it separates kinds of time. That separation is haunting. It suggests that ancient people imagined history as broken. Something existed, then catastrophe intervened. Continuity survived, but only through fragments. Selected survivors, restored kingship, and stories carried across ruin. You hear water in that thought, not the gentle canal water of daily life, but a wider and more frightening water. A water that covers records, fields, houses, names, and certainties. A water that leaves people asking what was lost when the old world disappeared. The King List does not explain everything. It does something stranger. It creates a bridge between mythic antiquity and recognizable dynastic memory. At one end stand impossible rulers in the shadow of the flood. At the other end stand kings who begin to touch archaeology, inscription, and political reality. Between them lies a trembling boundary. This boundary is where the Anunnaki question breathes again. If kingship descended from heaven, who sent it? If early rulers belonged to a sacred timeline, what authority stood above them? If the flood divided ages, what memory was preserved and what memory was left beneath the waters? The list gives no simple confession. It gives a structure, a system of cities, a movement of authority, a cycle of rise and loss, a memory of an earlier world that cannot be made fully ordinary. Even when read cautiously, the document preserves a profound ancient belief that human rule belonged to a larger cosmic order. You stand now on the edge of Shurapak in the old imagination. The air smells of river mud, reed smoke, and coming rain. People move through streets with ordinary concerns. A jar breaks, a child cries, a trader complains about measurements. No one sees the end of an age approaching. That is how endings usually come, not announced by trumpets. They gather in weather, politics, weakness, silence, and signs that people understand too late. Later memory will transform the end into a flood, a cleansing, a warning, a boundary between worlds. The story will become larger than any one town. Perhaps that is the point. The kings before the flood are not merely rulers. They are markers placed at the edge of remembrance. Their impossible reigns tell you that the first age is unreachable by ordinary time. Their cities tell you that authority moved across sacred geography. Their ending tells you that history can be broken and still continue. The tablet lies still beneath the museum light. Its numbers remain impossible. Its message remains calm. Once, it says, kingship came down from heaven. Once, cities held it beneath the stars. Once, the world was old in a way no living ruler could fully claim. Then the waters rose, and memory learned to speak in fragments. The hidden timeline does not look like a straight road. It feels more like a buried staircase, descending beneath the bright floor of official memory. Each step is older than the one above it. Each one is half covered with dust, salt, broken pottery, and the stubborn silence of things that survived without explaining themselves. You do not walk forward through this timeline. You sink into it. At the surface, you see cities, tablets, temples, kings, and names that historians can handle with reasonable confidence. Beneath that, you find older settlements, older shrines, older patterns of worship, and older habits of building. Beneath that, the ground grows darker. The evidence thins. The voice of history becomes slower, lower, more uncertain. This is where the imagination begins to listen too closely. Archaeology confirms that southern Mesopotamian urban civilization developed from long prehistoric foundations. The Ubaid and Uruk periods were not empty preludes. They were dynamic ages of settlement growth, craft production, ritual architecture, trade, and social change. By the time written records become clear, human communities had already been shaping the land for centuries. So the oldest tablets are not the beginning, they are a late arrival. That single idea disturbs the neatness of the story. Writing appears like dawn, but dawn does not create the night behind it. The light only reveals part of what was already there. Before names were fixed in clay, people remembered through songs, rites, kinship, graves, rebuilt shrines, and stories told near fires. Those stories could have carried very old material. Not perfectly, never perfectly. Memory changes when it moves through mouths, but it can preserve shapes, fears, and sacred patterns long after the first event disappears. A flood may become a divine warning, a drought may become a curse, a migration may become exile from a blessed place. A powerful ancestor may become something larger than human. That is how a hidden timeline may survive, not as a secret record. As a repeated shape, you are now standing in a landscape without writing. The city has not yet become monumental. The temple is smaller, but the sacred place is already marked. The people return to it generation after generation. They rebuild, they bury offerings, they remember that this mound matters, even when no one can explain exactly why. The wind smells of dust and wild grass. Smoke from a small hearth curls low against the ground. A woman places a bowl near a wall. A man repairs a reed mat. Children chase each other in the last light, unaware that future scholars will argue about the meaning of everything around them. That's a comfort and a warning. Human beings rarely know when they are becoming history. A scholarly debate remains active over how much continuity can be traced between prehistoric ritual sites and later Sumerian religious systems. Some researchers see long threads connecting early temple platforms, sacred spaces, and later urban worship. Others caution that without written explanations, material remains can be overinterpreted. A building may be sacred, administrative, domestic, or all three in changing measure. The ground does not label itself for us. Still, patterns invite attention. Repeated rebuilding at sacred sites suggests memory anchored to bookplay. Shared styles across distant settlements suggest cultural connection. Expanding trade suggests networks of exchange before full writing. Administrative tokens and sealings suggest systems of counting before tablets became common. Before the written word, there were marks. Before tablets, there were tokens. Before kingship was recorded as descending from heaven, authority may already have been gathering around ritual, storage, water control, and ancestral prestige. Later myths could have taken these older developments and lifted them into cosmic language. A quirky tidbit waits in this deep layer. Before cuneiform writing fully developed, small clay tokens were used in parts of the ancient Near East for counting goods. Some were simple cones, spheres, or discs. They look almost childlike, yet they may represent one of the quiet ancestors of bureaucracy. Civilization apparently learned to count before it learned to explain itself beautifully. That feels appropriate. First, the grain, then the myth. The hidden timeline may therefore move through several shadowed stages. First comes survival, where small communities learn the moods of water, soil, animals, and season. Then comes repetition, where certain places become meaningful because people keep returning to them. Then comes organization, where storage, labor, and leadership begin to harden into structure. After that comes the sacred city, then writing, then royal memory, then the polished story that tells everyone the order was always meant to be. You feel the quiet danger in that progression. A system born from practical need can later dress itself in eternal clothing. A canal coordinator becomes a leader becomes a sacred ruler. Sacred rule becomes heavenly kingship. Heavenly kingship becomes part of a cosmic timeline older than human memory. Perhaps nobody planned the deception. Perhaps the deception grew like a city, brick by brick. Every generation received a story, adjusted it, sanctified it, and passed it onward. By the time the scribes wrote the great myths, the oldest layer may already have been hidden beneath centuries of meaning. What began as memory became tradition. What became tradition became doctrine. What became doctrine became history. You walk deeper into the imagined past. The temple platform is gone now, reduced to an earlier shrine. The archive is gone. The king list is unwritten. The great city is still a promise waiting inside mud and water. Yet people still look up at the sky and down at the earth, trying to read both. They notice the stars. They notice floods. They notice death. They notice that children resemble parents, that seeds become plants, that clay can become a vessel, that labour can transform a plane into a home. Their world is not less intelligent because it lacks writing. It is only less visible to us. That is the humility hidden timelines demand. Modern people often imagine that forgotten ages were simple because they left fewer words, but silence is not simplicity. Silence may mean loss. Silence may mean material decay. Silence may mean no one has yet found the right mound, opened the right layer, or recognized the right clue. The deeper past remains full of unopened rooms. And inside those rooms, the Anunnaki become something more subtle than modern fantasy usually allows. They may be memories of divine hierarchy. They may be symbols of ruling order. They may be late names for very old sacred patterns. They may be masks worn by humanity's first attempts to explain why power, labour, and destiny felt older than any living king. The hidden timeline does not prove one's secrets. It reveals one wound. Human beings do not know where their own story truly begins. You stand at the edge of a prehistoric mound as night covers the plain. Beneath your feet lie floors older than language, ash older than kings, and offerings made by hands whose names are gone forever. Above you, the stars appear with ancient indifference. The timeline is there, not written in one place, buried in layers, waiting for patience. The priests of the archive live between silence and speech. They do not own the past in the way kings pretend to own land. They tend it, copy it, arrange it, protect it, and sometimes reshape it with their hands so careful they almost seem innocent. In the low rooms beside temples, memory becomes a profession. Sacred knowledge becomes clay, shelf, catalogue, habit, and discipline. You enter one of those rooms in the cool hour before dawn. The walls are thick mud brick. The floor smells faintly of dust, oil, and old reeds. Tablets rest on shelves, in baskets or stacked near a wall, some dry and hard, others still waiting for final handling. A lamp gives a soft yellow light. Its flame trembles when someone passes the doorway. A scribe sits cross-legged with a tablet on his lap. He is not young. His fingers know the signs without needing to admire them. He presses the reed stylus into clay with quiet authority, making wedges that seem small enough to be harmless, yet those small marks can preserve a king, erase a rival, elevate a god, or carry a myth across centuries. That is power of a peculiar kind. Ancient Mesopotamia developed complex scribal traditions with schools, lexical lists, royal inscriptions, hymns, legal documents, and literary compositions, collections studied by institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the British Museum reveal a world where writing supported administrations, religion, education, and political memory. The archive was never just storage. It was a filter. To copy something is to decide it still matters. To stop copying something is to let it drift toward disappearance. Sometimes this happens without malice. A tablet breaks. A school changes its curriculum. A temple loses funding. A city falls out of favour. A new dynasty prefers different ancestors. Memory does not always die by fire. Sometimes it does. dies by neglect. You watch the scribe pause and moisten the clay slightly. He turns a tablet toward the lamp. The old version is damaged along one edge. A line is partly missing. He knows the tradition well enough to restore it. Or perhaps he thinks he does. His hand hesitates for only a breath. Then he writes. In that tiny moment, history sends us history bends, not dramatically, not with trumpets or secret meetings beneath the moon. It bends through an educated guess, a preferred wording, a familiar formula, a decision shaped by training and belief. The copy becomes cleaner than the damaged original. Future readers may never know where certainty ended and restoration began. A scholarly debate continues over how much variation in surviving Mesopotamian texts reflects regional traditions, scribal creativity, political pressure, or ordinary copying habits. Some experts emphasize the stability of professional scribal culture. Others point to changes in wording, theology, and emphasis across time and place. Both views matter because the archive is alive, even when its tablets look dead. A quirky tidbit comes from scribal education itself. Some school tablets preserve mistakes, corrections, and exercises written by students who are still learning. You can almost feel the ancient teacher leaning over them, unimpressed. Thousands of years pass, and though the poor student's bad copywork survives in a museum, immortality is not always flattering. Yet those awkward tablets are precious. They show that writing was learned through repetition, discipline, and hierarchy. A student copied lists until language became muscle memory. He learned the names of gods, professions, animals, stones, cities, and stars. He learned not only how to write, but how his culture arranged reality. Cultures. That arrangement shaped the stories. If a divine name appeared in a list, it occupied a place. If a city appeared in a sequence, it inherited meaning. If a myth was copied in school, it entered the mind of another generation. The archive did not merely preserve belief, it trained people to think inside it. You hear the faint scrape of reed on clay. The sound is small, dry, and intimate. It is the sound of a world choosing what will survive. Temple archives held administrative documents, ritual text, hymns, omens, incantations, and learned traditions. Some materials were practical, others sacred, and many lived between those categories. A grain account could support a temple offering, a ritual text could reinforce political authority, a hymn could praise a god while strengthening the status of a city. Nothing stands alone. This is where the idea of hidden history becomes more subtle. You do not need to imagine a single forbidden chamber where priests lock away the truth. The more realistic mystery is slower. Archives organize memory according to the needs of institutions. Institutions survive by protecting certain meanings. Meanings become tradition when copied often enough. Over time, tradition feels ancient. Then ancient tradition feels unquestionable. You walk along the tablet shelves and sense how much has already been lost. Some clay records were deliberately stored. Others survived because fire baked them during destruction. Some were discarded as useless, only to become priceless in a distant age. Others melted back into earth when rain entered ruined rooms. The archive is both guardian and grave. It guards selected voices. It buries the rest. The priests who move through these spaces are not cartoon villains hiding humanity's origin beneath their robes. They are servants of gods, cities, and systems they believe are real. They pour offerings, recite formulas, supervise ritual calendars, and maintain relationships between human society and divine order. Their world depends on continuity. A ritual performed incorrectly might disturb balance. A forgotten hymn might offend a deity. A neglected festival might weaken the city's protection. In this atmosphere, memory is not leisure, it is responsibility. But responsibility can become control. Control. If you control the calendar, you control sacred time. If you control temple records, you control obligation. If you control divine stories, you help shape what people believe about labor, kingship, creation, and obedience. That is the quiet machinery beneath the archive. Not machinery of metal and gears, but machinery of repetition, words copied again, names invoked again, roles assigned again, myths recited again until they feel older than the ground itself. The Anunnaki endure within this machinery as figures of cosmic authority. They are preserved not because modern mystery demanded them, but because ancient systems had use for divine assemblies, judgment, fate, and sacred hierarchy. Their power lies partly in what texts say, and partly in how institutions kept saying it. You step back from the scribe's lamp, the clay tablets finished now, but still damp enough to receive a final mark. The scribe inspects his work. Outside, dawn begins to pale the sky above the city. Workers will soon enter courtyards, priests will prepare offerings, officials will open storerooms, life will resume its measured pattern. The tablet dries. A memory has been selected. Somewhere in the same city, another memory fades without being written at all. The deception begins not with a locked door, not with a priest whispering beside a forbidden chest. It begins when one people inherits another people's memory and decides how that memory should sound in a new tongue. Language is a gentle knife. It can carry a story forward, but it also cuts away edges that no longer fit. A name crosses from Sumerian into Akkadian. A hymn is copied by a later scribe. A divine title is explained with a newer meaning. A city falls, but its god survives under altered emphasis. Nothing appears violent at first. Then centuries pass. You stand in a scribal room where the old Sumerian language is already becoming something sacred and learned. Not the ordinary speech of the street. Students still copy it. Priests still chant it, scholars still preserve it. Yet outside the temple schools, other voices rise, carrying Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian forms of prowess. The old words remain. Their world has changed. Historians have long recognized that Sumerian continued as a prestigious written and liturgical language after it ceased to be widely spoken. Major research traditions at Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and other institutions treat this as one of the most important facts of Mesopotamian intellectual life. A dead or fading language can become more sacred, not less. That is unsettling. When a language becomes sacred, it gains authority, but it also becomes dependent on specialists. Ordinary people no longer meet the story directly. They receive it through trained interpreters, approved recitations, school traditions, and temple memory. This is not always sinister. It is also how wisdom survives. But survival has a price. Imagine an older myth copied for a king who rules a different world from the one that first shaped it. The king has armies, borders, rivals, tax systems, and a desire to appear chosen. The myth carries ancient weight, so it becomes useful. A divine story can support a royal claim more elegantly than a spear can. The spear persuades the body. The myth persuades the soul. Empire understands this with remarkable patience. It does not need to erase every old god. Sometimes it adopts them, renames them, ranks them differently, or places them beneath a greater national deity. A conquered tradition may remain visible, but its position changes inside the new order. That is how memory can be hidden while still being displayed. A statue can stand in public and still be misunderstood. A tablet can be copied faithfully and still serve a different purpose. A god can keep the same name while becoming part of another political dream. A scholarly debate continues over how deeply later Babylonian and Assyrian scribes reshaped earlier Sumerian traditions. Some researchers emphasize respect for inherited materials and technical accuracy. Others point toward theological rewriting, selective preservation, and political adaptation. The clay preserves both continuity and transformation. which is exactly why the question refuses to sleep. You move now through a royal city where victory smells like cedar smoke, bronze, sweat, and dust. Envoys arrive, prisoners are counted, tribute is measured, foreign objects enter storerooms, foreign stories enter libraries. The empire does not merely collect wealth, it collects worlds. Among the strange treasures of Mesopotamian scholarship are tablets with colophons, little closing notes that identify a scribe, owner, source, or warning. Some even threaten anyone who steals or mishandles the tablet with divine anger. Ancient copyright protection had more thunder in it. In "The tidbit makes you smile." Then it turns colder. If a tablet can be marked as owned, protected, and authorized, then knowledge has already entered the realm of power. Not all knowledge circulates freely. Some belongs to temples, some belongs to palaces, some belongs to trained families, some belongs to gods, which conveniently means humans must ask the right officials. The deception does not require one master plan. It can grow from normal institutions doing normal things. A palace promotes stories that support kingship. A temple preserves hymns that honor its own deity. A school teaches versions considered worthy. A conquered city loses its archives. A dialect disappears. A translation becomes standard because later readers have no alternative. Over time, the official version hardens. Not because it is completely false, because it is the version that survived with authority. You feel the weight of that distinction. A surviving story may be true in spirit, partial in detail, altered in purpose, and surrounded by silences. It can illuminate one layer while burying another. It can preserve the shape of ancient memory while hiding the conditions that created it. This is where the Anunnaki become vulnerable to distortion. Their meaning moves through languages, cities, religious systems, and modern imaginations. Ancient scribes gave them one kind of weight. Later theologians gave them another. Modern fringe writers gave them another still. Each age asks the name to answer its own hunger. The ancient world wanted order, so empire wanted legitimacy. Modern readers want revelation. Every desire leaves fingerprints. You stand beside a translator working by lamplight. He has an older tablet open beside a fresh one. Some words are clear, others resist him. A divine title may not have an exact equivalent. A ritual phrase may belong to a vanished ceremony. A place name may carry a memory no longer understood. He chooses carefully, perhaps honestly. Yet even honest translation is interpretation. To translate is to decide which meaning is closest, which tone matters, which ambiguity can be tolerated, and which strangeness must be smoothed for the reader. That smoothing may be the beginning of forgetting. The oldest human inheritance may not have been hidden in one dramatic act. It may have been softened, polished, reorganized, and made useful. The rough edges of ancient memory were trimmed until they fit temple recitation, royal ideology, scholarly classification, and later belief. You look outward across the city at night. The palace walls glow in torchlight. The temple tower rises beyond them. Somewhere, scribes preserve old myths with reverence. Somewhere else, officials shape public memory with quiet confidence. In the spaces between them, older meanings thin like smoke. And perhaps that is the great deception's first truthful. Its real face, not a lie replacing truth. A system replacing mystery. Myths do not always announce what they are hiding. They move softly through the mind, wearing the clothing of wonder. A god speaks, a river rises, a creature is shaped from clay, a star is given a name. A sacred mountain touches heaven. The listener accepts the image, because the image is beautiful enough to enter without force. Then it stays. You sit beneath a reed roof while night settles over an ancient courtyard. The air smells of lamp oil, warm dust, and crushed herbs. A storyteller speaks near the doorway, where children lean against their mothers and older men listen with faces made unreadable by firelight. No one asks for a footnote. No one asks for a laboratory. They listen for meaning. That is how myths survive. Not by proving themselves, by becoming necessary. Ancient Mesopotamian myths contain repeated patterns of creation, divine command, sacred labour, flood, kingship, rebellion, and restoration. Scholars from major universities have long studied these stories as literary, religious, and social documents. They reveal how early civilizations explained power, suffering, order, and humanity's fragile place in the world. But a myth can do more than explain. It can store. A myth may hold memory in symbolic form, especially when ordinary records vanish. A flood story may preserve the emotional shape of real disasters. A creation story may preserve the social memory of labor systems. Divine counsel may preserve the experience of kings or elders, assemblies, and institutions. The myth changes scale, but the pattern remains. This is where the idea of coded memory becomes useful. Not secret code in the modern sense. No hidden password waits beneath the surface. No priestly puzzle unlocks the whole past with one clever turn. The code is older and stranger. It is metaphor, repetition, ritual language, and sacred imagery carrying thoughts too large or dangerous for plain speech. Clay becomes the body, blood becomes life, breath becomes spirit, the star becomes order, the flood becomes forgetting. These images are simple enough for a child to remember, yet deep enough for a civilization to carry for centuries. That is the quiet genius of myth. It compresses history, fear, theology, and social instruction into scenes the mind can repeat beside a fire. You hear the storyteller describe the making of humans. The words are gentle, but the idea is uneasy. A divine being is involved. Earthly material is shaped. Something sacred enters the mixture. Humanity appears, not as an accident, but as a creature bound to duty, memory, and command. The courtyard grows still. Even the children seem to understand that this is not merely a story about the first body. It is a story about every body, every worker in the field, every woman grinding grain, every scribe bending over clay, every ruler pretending his throne is not also made of dust. The myth tells them where they belong. It also tells them why they suffer. A scholarly debate remains open over whether these myths should be read primarily as theology, social philosophy, political symbolism, environmental memory, or inherited poetic tradition. Some researchers emphasize their ritual and religious meaning. Others explore how myths encode real pressures from irrigation, urban labor, famine, floods, and authority. The wisest reading may allow several doors. Ancient stories rarely carry one burden alone. A quirky tidbit belongs here, and it comes from the cylinder seal. In Mesopotamia, tiny carved cylinders could be rolled across wet clay to create continuous scenes. Gods, animals, heroes, banquets, and strange hybrid beings could appear in a small moving band of images. It was almost like an ancient miniature film strip, except less convenient to pause and much harder to stream. The joke fades quickly. Those seals show how deeply image and authority were linked. A rolled seal could identify a person, secure property, mark a transaction, and display a world of symbols. The owner carried not just a signature, but a tiny universe of meaning. Myth worked in a similar way. It rolled across as generations, leaving repeated impressions. Each telling pressed old patterns into new minds. A divine figure with a horned crown, a sacred tree and a serpent, a mountain, a river of death, a boat surviving impossible waters, a tablet of destiny, a gate that only the chosen may pass. These are not random decorations. They are memory shapes. You walk now through a dream of symbols. The ground beneath your feet is clay. but the sky above is written like a tablet. Stars appear as signs arranged by unseen hands. A river cuts through the plain like a sentence, far away. A temple rises like a stairway between breath and silence. The ancient world does not separate symbol from reality as sharply as the modern mind often does. A name can carry power. A ritual can maintain order. A statue can receive presence. A written sign can hold obligation. A myth can act upon the listener, not merely entertain him. That is why hidden truth may survive inside beauty. A direct record can be burned. A royal archive can collapse. A city can be abandoned. But a story told by grandmothers, priests, singers, and scribes can travel through ruin. It may change its clothing many times, yet still carry an old bone inside. Perhaps the Anunnaki endure because they are such bones. They are not one tutty answer. They are a memory structure. They gather ideas about power above human sight, decisions made beyond ordinary reach, and duties imposed upon life from an older order. Whether seen as gods, symbols, or distorted echoes, they hold the shape of authority descending from somewhere else. That shape is difficult to forget. You hear the storyteller's voice lower. He speaks of tablets held by divine powers, of destinies fixed, of a world measured before humans understood the measure. He speaks not like a scientist, but like someone guarding a truth through images. The listeners do not need every word to be literal. They need the story to keep the universe from becoming meaningless. That is the soft danger of myth. It comforts and controls at the same time. If the story says humanity was made to serve, service becomes sacred. If the story says kingship came from heaven, obedience gains cosmic weight. If the story says floods erase corrupt ages, catastrophe becomes part of moral order. If the story says hidden beings shape destiny, then the unseen remains politically useful. Yet myth can also protect the human soul. It allows people to remember disaster without drowning in it. It allows them to speak of injustice through divine conflict. It allows them to imagine that suffering belongs to a larger pattern, even when no human judge appears. The fire in the courtyard burns lower. The storyteller falls silent, and the children are carried towards sleep. The adults remain awake a little longer, staring at the embers. Somewhere inside them, the myth continues its quiet work. Not as proof, not as lay, as a vessel. And like every vessel made from clay, it holds only what time has not yet spilled. The genetic whisper begins as a modern temptation. You hear it whenever ancient clay speaks of shaping, mixing, blood, breath, and design. The modern mind leans closer, carrying its microscope, its laboratories, its bright machines, and its enormous confidence. It sees an old myth about creation and wonders whether the ancients were describing something they could not name. A code, a pattern, a hidden instruction written inside life. You stand now in two worlds at once. One is an ancient room of clay, smoke and lamplight. The other is a clean modern laboratory, where glass reflects white light and instruments hum with careful precision. Between them lies a dangerous bridge, built from curiosity and uncertainty. It is easy to cross too quickly. In ancient Mesopotamian creation traditions, humanity may be formed through clay combined with a divine element. In modern genetics, life is understood through inherited biological information, carried through complex structures no ancient scribe could have described scientifically. The distance between those worlds is vast, yet the image is touch. That touch is what troubles the imagination. The ancient story says human beings are made, not merely born. It says material from earth is given form. It says something higher enters the mixture. It says human life carries both low substance and sacred connection. The modern ear hears this and thinks of design, inheritance, and code, and care is needed here. A myth is not a laboratory report. Clay is not a chromosome. A divine essence is not a technical formula. The old scribes were working with ritual language, social meaning, and sacred imagination. They were not writing a biology textbook hidden beneath poetry. Still, the symbolic power remains striking. Modern science confirms that human beings carry genetic information inherited from long ancestral lines, and that human origins are far older and more complex than ancient royal chronologies imagined. Studies from major research institutions have shown that human ancestry includes migrations, interbreeding among ancient populations, adaptation, and deep biological continuity across immense time. That knowledge does not prove the fringe theory. It makes the human story deeper. You are not a simple creature dropped suddenly into history. You are a living archive. Your body carries traces of ancestors who walked through forests, grasslands, coastlines, mountains, and river valleys long before the first Sumerian tablet dried in the sun. Your bones belong to deep time. Your breath is new, but the pattern beneath it is ancient. That's mysterious enough. The fringe tidbit is more dramatic. Some writers have claimed that the Anunnaki altered early humans to create a worker species, using advanced knowledge preserved only as myth. They point towards stories of clay, divine blood, or servant creation, and heavenly rulers. They arrange the fragments into a tale of hidden engineering. It is a powerful modern myth that should make you cautious. Modern myths can disguise themselves as explanations of ancient myths. They offer certainty where the evidence offers fragments. They turn poetic language into technical diagrams. They flatten theology into machinery. They make the past thrilling, but sometimes they make it smaller. The ancient stories do not need to become science fiction to feel profound. They already ask a deeper question. What does it mean to be made for a purpose you did not choose? What does it mean to carry something divine and still be bound to labour? What does it mean to be shaped by forces older than memory, whether gods, ancestors, evolution, or civilization itself? That is the real whisper, not a secret formula hidden in a tablet, a question hidden inside the human condition. A scholarly debate continues over how to interpret creation language in Mesopotamian texts. Some researchers emphasize ritual symbolism, especially the use of clay as a sacred material of formation. Others see reflections of labor organization, where humanity's origin explains social service. Some compare the motifs with wider ancient Near Eastern traditions, where earth, breath, blood, and divine speech often appear in stories of life. None of these readings requires a hidden laboratory. All of them reveal a civilization thinking seriously about existence. You move through the ancient room again. A priest shapes a small clay figure for ritual use. His hands are careful. The figure is not alive, but it participates in a world where images, names, and materials matter. Clay can represent a person. A spoken formula can transform a meaning. A ritual act can restore order. This is not genetics. It is sacred craft. But sacred craft has its own intelligence. It understands that form matters. It understands that material matters. It understands that a thing shaped by hands may carry intention beyond its visible substance. In that sense, ancient creation stories are not primitive mistakes. They are symbolic investigations into what makes life more than mud. You touch your own wrist in the darkness. A pulse answers. That pulse is older than kings, older than temples, older than writing. It belongs to biology, but also to memory. It is the rhythm of countless bodies before yours, each one fragile, temporary, necessary. The ancient scribes did not know the science of inheritance, yet they knew that life carried continuity. Parents became children. The dead remained present. Names mattered. Bloodlines mattered. Kings claimed descent from gods, heroes, or chosen ancestors because power often dresses itself in origin. If a ruler can control the story of descent, he can control the feeling of legitimacy. The body becomes political. Birth becomes sacred evidence. Genealogy becomes a quiet weapon. Perhaps this is where the genetic whisper meets the historical deception, not in a literal hidden code, but in the control of origin stories. Tell people they are clay, and you teach humility. Tell them they carry divine essence, and you teach sacred obligation. Tell them they were made to serve, and you sanctify labour. Tell a king he descends from heaven, and you place obedience in the blood. Origin is power. Whoever controls the beginning controls the meaning of everything that follows. You sit beneath a darkening sky, and the stars appear above the ancient plain. They do not reveal whether the Anunnaki were gods, symbols, rulers, or memories reshaped beyond recognition. They only shine with terrible patience. The human body remains below them, warm, brief, and full of hidden instructions. The clay tablet remains beside it, cool, cracked, and full of hidden questions. Between the two lies the whisper, not proof, not fantasy, a reminder that humanity has always suspected it was made from more than it could see. The flood arrives first as a sound, not a scream or not a crash, a low pressure in the distance, or like the earth breathing through water. The air changes before the sky does. Birds lift from the reeds. Dogs grow restless near doorways. People glance toward the river with that ancient expression shared by farmers everywhere. The face of someone measuring danger without wanting to name it. Then the rain begins. At first, it seems ordinary. A blessing. Perhaps a relief from dust, heat, and cracked fields. Water taps against reed roofs and darkens the mud brick walls. Children watch it fall from doorways. Workers pull tools under cover. Someone laughs because the first cool wind feels kind. But water has a second face. In Mesopotamia, rivers gave life through irrigation, transport, fish, reeds, clay, and fertile silt. They also carried danger. Floods could damage fields, erase canals, undermine walls, and change the future of a settlement in a single season. Archaeological research has found flood deposits at several ancient sites, although their dates, scale, and meanings are carefully debated. The land remembers water in layers. You walk through Shurapak in the old imagination, where the sky has become a heavy lid. Rain falls harder now. The lanes glisten. Water gathers around thresholds and runs along packed earth. Clay walls drink too much and begin to soften at their bases. A jar tips over in a courtyard, and no one bothers to lift it. The river is no longer background. It is approaching as a ruler. In Mesopotamian flood traditions, catastrophe does not merely destroy houses, it divides time. A world exists, then waters rise, and another world must begin from what survives. The flood becomes more than weather. It becomes judgment, interruption, cleansing, warning, and memory wrapped into one dark movement. This is why flood stories are so powerful. They make loss understandable. Without a story, disaster is only terror. With a story, disaster becomes part of a pattern. Even if the pattern is painful, ancient people did not need modern instruments to understand that water could unmake human confidence. They saw walls dissolve. They saw fields vanish. They saw graves disturbed and grain stores ruined. They saw human planning humbled in a single night. A scholarly debate remains open over how Mesopotamian flood stories relate to real flood events. Some researchers connect them with regional river disasters remembered across generations. Others emphasize literary structure, theology, and the symbolic role of water in separating primeval ages from historical kingship. The discussion continues because the evidence is suggestive, but never simple. That uncertainty gives the story its depth. A flood can be both real and symbolic. A city can drown in water, and a culture can drown in forgetting. One destroys walls, the other destroys context. Together, they create the silence that later generations try to fill with myth. You hear thunder roll above the plain. Inside one house, a family lifts baskets onto a higher platform. In another, a man tries to block a doorway with reeds and clay. A woman gathers small objects that carry more memory than value. A seal, a bowl, a little figure, a tablet with names no stranger would understand. What do people save when time collapses? Not always gold. Sometimes they save the thing that proves they belong somewhere. The strange tidbit here comes from the ancient flood hero, known in different traditions by different names. In one famous version, he survives because divine warning reaches him, and he builds a great vessel. Later readers have compared this tale with other ancient flood narratives across the Near East. Modern fringe writers sometimes add that the warning came from hidden beings preserving selected bloodlines or secret knowledge. It is a dramatic idea, and it floats very well. The older text is quieter. It speaks of divine conflict, human noise, survival, sacrifice, and the fragile mercy of continuation. The gods themselves are not always presented as calm masters. They can be divided, regretful, fearful, and moved by offerings. Catastrophe exposes not only human weakness but divine unease. That is more haunting than simple punishment. You stand now above the plain as if in a dream. Water spreads where streets had been. The outlines of houses soften. Reeds bend flat beneath rain. A storage room collapses inward with a dull sound. Tablets fall into mud. Some dissolve. Some are buried. Some, by accident, may one day survive because destruction covers them deeply enough. Ruin is merciless and selective. It chooses without justice. One tablet vanishes forever. Another broken school exercise survives 4,000 years. A royal boast crumbles. A grocery account reaches a museum. A sacred hymn loses its opening lines. A damaged myth becomes the doorway to centuries of speculation. The flood of forgetting works in the same strange way. Humanity remembers the great shape of loss, but not every name inside it. It remembers a vessel, a warning, a chosen survivor, a world washed clean, and offerings made when dry land returns. It does not remember every child, every worker, every old woman clutching a household charm as water enters the room. Myth preserves the mountain. It loses the footprints when the waters withdraw. Silence comes, not peace yet, just the stunned quiet after the world has changed its furniture. Mud covers floors, fish lie in places where no fish should be. Walls lean, the air smells of rot, wet clay, river plants, and extinguished fires. People begin again because they must. They clear debris, they search for tools, they count the missing, they repair canals that water destroyed while also needing water to live. Human life resumes its old paradox, dependent on the thing it fears. The flood becomes memory because repetition demands meaning. If disasters return, people ask why. If cities fall, people ask what angered heaven. If kingship resumes, people ask who allowed it back into the world. The story answers through sacred sequence. There was an age, there was destruction, there was survival, there was renewed order. The Anunnaki stand within that renewed order like figures behind a curtain. If they are judges, then the flood suggests judgment. If they are architects, then the flood suggests a resetting of design. If they are symbols of cosmic authority, then the flood marks the moment when that authority overwhelms human noise, pride, and memory. Yet no answer holds completely. The rain stops. Clouds break above the ancient plain, and pale light spreads across waterlogged earth. Somewhere, a survivor steps outside and looks over a world made unfamiliar. The sky is clear now, almost innocent. The river moves on, carrying fragments of roofs, reeds, and names. The flood has ended. Forgetting has only begun. What was hidden may not have been a single object. Not one golden tablet, not one sealed chamber beneath a temple floor, not one forbidden sentence that explains the whole human story with perfect cruelty. The more you walk through the ancient silence, the more the secret becomes wider, softer, and harder to hold. Perhaps what was hidden was dependence. Human beings have always wanted to imagine themselves as authors of their own beginning. A comforting thought, very tidy, very flattering. Yet the oldest records suggest a less comfortable vision. Humanity appears inside systems already in motion. Systems of land, water, labour, hierarchy, ritual, memory, and powers imagined above the human world. You stand on a low mound at sunset, where ruins lie beneath your feet like sleeping bones. Nothing dramatic happens. The wind moves over dry grass. A few broken sherds catch the light. Somewhere below, under soil and collapsed brick, there may be a floor where someone once knelt, counted, prayed, or wept. History often hides in ordinary places. The mainstream fact is plain, but profound. Archaeology shows that early civilization emerged through long processes of settlement. Agriculture, irrigation, social coordination, craft production, and symbolic life. No single invention created the city. Writing, temples, kingship, accounting, trade, and labour organisation developed together across generations. Civilization was not a spark, it was a web. That web is the first concealed truth. People were never alone in their own making. They were shaped by rivers, by climate, by crops, by animals, by diseases, by ancestors, by stories, by institutions, and by the quiet demands of survival. Even before kings claimed divine approval, the earth itself was already giving commands. Plant here, store this. Move water, build higher. Remember loss. The Anunnaki may represent one ancient way of imagining that command, not merely gods as personalities, but gods as structure. They give form to the feeling that life is governed by forces too large to see directly. They express the sense that existence has rules and that human beings enter those rules late. This is not small. It means the hidden history of humanity may be less about who visited Earth, and more about how humans explained being placed inside obligations they did not choose. A scholarly debate remains open over how much ancient myth reflects social reality. Some researchers emphasize religious imagination and ritual truth. Others focus on political ideology, where myths justify kingship and labour. Still others look toward environmental pressure, arguing that floods, droughts, and irrigation shape the stories people told about divine control. Each approach holds part of the vessel. None holds all the water. You descend from the mound into the remains of a street. The path is uneven. Your foot brushes against old brick dust. A doorway opens into nothing, yet you can almost sense the vanished room. Someone may have stored grain there. Someone may have whispered a name there. Someone may have hidden a small object beneath the threshold for protection. A quirky tidbit belongs to these buried domestic spaces. Archaeologists sometimes find objects placed beneath floors, walls, or thresholds, suggesting rituals of protection, memory, or foundation. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern landlord. Yes, the house needs drainage and storage and a spiritually confident doorway. The humour is gentle. The meaning is serious. Ancient people did not separate daily life from unseen forces. A threshold was not just wood and clay. It was a boundary. A house was not just shelter. It was a living space of family, ancestors, danger, and protection. A city wall was not just a fence. It was the line between ordered life and threatening outside. What was hidden then may have been the depth of meaning beneath practical things. A canal was technology. but also survival. A temple was architecture, but also cosmic negotiation. A tablet was writing, but also authority. A king was a man, but also a symbol. A myth was a story, but also a map of obedience and fear. Modern people often flatter these layers. They ask whether the ancient story is true or false. The better question may be quieter. What work did the story perform? Whom did it comfort? Whom did it discipline? What did it preserve? What did it make invisible? That last question lingers. A myth that explains labour can honour workers, but it can also trap them. A story that makes kingship sacred can stabilise a city, but it can also silence resistance. A tradition that places divine authority above human life can create beauty, discipline, and devotion, while also making hierarchy feel natural. Perhaps the deception was not hidden history. Perhaps it was hidden power. Power becomes strongest when it feels older than choice. If people believe the order of society descends from heaven, they may stop imagining that it was built by human hands. The city becomes sacred, the ruler becomes necessary, the burden becomes destiny. And yet, these same stories also preserve human dignity in unexpected ways. If humans were made to serve the gods, then humans were still needed by the gods. If humans were clay, then clay could become memory. If humans were small, then their songs still reached the temple. If workers carried bricks, then the divine house rose because of their labour. The hidden tradition. Tangled out of her. It does not behave nicely. You walk past a broken wall and pause where the evening wind gathers. The world around you is almost empty, yet it feels crowded with systems. The river beyond the fields, the temple beyond the houses, the archive beyond the temple, the myth beyond the archive, the question beyond the myth. What was hidden was not merely an origin, it was the chain connecting origin to obedience. Tell a person where they came from, and you shape what they believe they owe. Tell a people their labour began in heaven, and the fields become part of sacred duty. Tell a king his rule was granted above, and rebellion becomes more than politics. That is a powerful design. Maybe too powerful to be accidental. Still, sans certainty would be false comfort. The clay does not let you accuse one priest, one king, one empire, or one age. The concealment is broader than villainy. It belongs to how societies remember, organise, sanctify, and survive. Night settles over the ruins. The stars appear to again, distant and clean. Beneath them, every hidden thing feels both closer and farther away. You realise the secret may not be waiting under the earth. It may be waiting inside the stories people still accept without noticing who benefits from them. The ruin gives no verdict. It only asks you to keep listening. The last tablet is not found in a glittering chamber. It does not rest beneath a golden statue, guarded by curses and perfect darkness. It lies, perhaps, where most lost things lie, in ordinary ruin, under a collapsed shelf, beneath a floor repaired by someone who never knew what had been covered. Inside a broken jar used for storage, or then forgotten when the city failed. You imagine it small, not impressive at first. A palm-sized piece of clay, darkened by fire along one side, chipped at the corner, its surface crowded with signs. The lines are uneven because the scribe was tired, or because the tablet was written in haste, or because the room was already filled with dust and fear. No one knows where that is what makes it powerful. The ancient world left many tablets, but never all of them. Excavations across Mesopotamia have recovered enormous numbers of cuneiform documents, including accounts, letters, hymns, omens, myths, school exercises, and royal inscriptions. Yet every surviving archive is only a fraction of what once existed. Clay can endure for thousands of years. It can also vanish in one rainstorm. So the last tablet becomes a symbol, not proof. It represents every missing line, every broken edge, every tradition that reached the writing room too late, every story spoken by a grandmother but never pressed into clay. It is the shape of absence made visible. You kneel in an imagined ruin at twilight. The air is cool now, carrying the dry scent of earth, salt, and old brick. Wind moves through the gaps where walls once stood. A lizard slips across a fallen threshold. Somewhere above, a bird gives one sharp call, then disappears into the quiet. Your fingers brush the ground. The dust is fine. Beneath it, the tablet waits. On this imagined tablet, perhaps there is no shocking sentence. Perhaps it does not say the Anunnaki came from the star, and perhaps it does not confess that humanity was engineered in a hidden chamber. Perhaps it does not overturn every museum label with one theatrical flourish. That would be too easy. Instead, perhaps it preserves something more troubling. A variant of a creation story where humans are not merely servants, but witnesses. A lost hymn describing divine beings as guardians of forgotten order. A temple tradition naming cities older than the surviving king lists. A damaged passage linking flood, labour, kingship, and memory in a way no modern theory quite expects. Not an answer. A rearrangement. That is often what new discoveries do. They do not always destroy history, they adjust its shadows. A newly found tablet may change a date, restore a missing line, reveal a local tradition, or show that one famous story had multiple forms. The past rarely turns into a completely different animal. You become stranger in the details. A scholarly debate remains active over how representative surviving Mesopotamian texts really are. Some scholars trust the large corpus to reveal major patterns clearly. Others emphasize accident, regional loss, institutional bias, and the uneven survival of archives. The question is not whether the evidence matters. It matters deeply. The question is what kind of silence surrounds it. That silence is the true chamber. You picture the scribe who wrote the last tablet. He sits by lamplight while the city mutters beyond the wall. His hand is steady, but his face carries the tension of a man preserving something under pressure. Perhaps a dynasty has changed. Perhaps the temple school has received new instructions. Perhaps invaders are near. Perhaps he is only copying an old tale because his teacher told him to finish before sunset. History can look dramatic from far away. Up close, it often looks like work. He presses the reed into clay. Each wedge enters softly, leaving a mark that may outlive every argument in the room. He does not know that a future age will turn his signs into mystery. To him, the words belong to a living system of gods, duties, cities, and memory. A quirky tidbit belongs to the fate of tablets themselves. Some tablets survived because ancient disasters accidentally baked them hard, turning destruction into preservation. Fire, usually the enemy of libraries, sometimes became the librarian. The past does enjoy inconvenient irony. The scribe finishes the final line. Perhaps he adds a note. Perhaps he names the source. Perhaps he invokes a god. Perhaps he leaves no signature, only the story itself. Then the tablet is placed with others, and the room returns to ordinary silence. Years pass. Centuries pass. The city changes hands. The temple loses wealth. The archive becomes clutter, then debris, then earth. A wall collapses inward. Rain enters once, then again. Some tablets crack, some dissolve, some sink deeper into mud. The last tablet slips beyond memory, carried downward by weight, darkness, and time. Yet in your mind it remains whole enough to disturb you. You do not need it to reveal a perfect hidden truth. You need it to remind you that history is incomplete by nature. Every official timeline stands over a buried field of missing voices. Every confident textbook sentence rests on evidence that survived and evidence that did not. The last tablet is the missing witness. It asks what humanity would know if the preservation had been fair. It asks whether ancient people held traditions that would change how the Anunnaki are understood. It asks whether the oldest stories were once richer, stranger, more human, and more unsettling than the versions left to us. You sit beside the ruin as night gathers. Above you, the stars emerge one by one, cold and exact. Beneath you, the ground holds the pressure of vanished rooms. Between sky and soil, the human mind does what it has always done. It searches for pattern, it makes careful guesses, it fears deception, it longs for origin. Perhaps the last tablet is never meant to be found. Perhaps it lives as a boundary, a place where evidence ends and humility begins. It prevents certainty from becoming arrogance. It keeps the mystery open without demanding that fantasy replace scholarship. It says the past is not empty simply because it is silent. The wind moves over the mound. A few grains of dust shift near your stand. For one breath, it feels as if the buried clay almost speaks. Then the night grows still again. Night over the ruins comes without ceremony. The last light leaves the broken walls, and the plain turns the colour of ash. You stand where a city once believed itself chosen, protected, and necessary. Now the houses are low scars beneath the soil. The temple is a mound. The streets have become faint paths for wind, beetles, and moonlight. Nothing here looks powerful anymore. That is the trick of time. Power always imagines itself permanent while it is alive. Kings carve their names into brick. Priests preserve sacred formulas. Scribes place tablets onto shelves with careful hands. Builders raise platforms toward the sky, trusting height to imitate eternity. Then the river changes, the dynasty fails, the roof collapses, and dust accepts everything with perfect manners. Archaeology confirms that many Mesopotamian cities passed through long kills of occupation, abandonment, rebuilding, and rediscovery. A great site could be storied, crowded, and politically vital in one age, then quiet beneath sand and alluvium in another. Human importance does not always vanish suddenly. Sometimes it sinks. You walk through that sinking now. The ground is cool under your feet. The air smells of salt, dry grass, and old clay. A faint wind moves across the mound, brushing loose grit against broken pottery. Each fragment catches the moon for a moment, then returns to darkness. The ruins do not feel empty, they feel paused. Somewhere beneath the earth are rooms that knew laughter, calculation, hunger, worship, and fear. Somewhere beneath your path, a child once stepped over the threshold of a house and entered a morning that felt ordinary. Somewhere nearby, a worker lifted bricks for a wall that would one day become an archaeological layer. A quirky tidbit lingers in this quiet. Early excavators sometimes move through ancient mounds with more enthusiasm than delicacy, hunting spectacular objects while disturbing context. Modern archaeology has become far more careful, but the past has already endured many very confident shovels. The thought is almost amusing. Almost, because every disturbance changes what can be known. A tablet without context is still valuable, but its voice is thinner. A figurine without its room loses part of its meaning. A wall without its sequence becomes less certain. The ancient world does not only speak through objects, it speaks through relationships between objects. That is why certainty remains difficult. A scholarly debate continues over how much ancient religion can be reconstructed from texts, images, architecture, and later copies. Some researchers trust the pattern strongly. Others warn that ritual meaning can shift across cities and centuries. The evidence is abundant, yet incomplete enough to keep humility awake. Humility is necessary here. The Anunnaki stand at the centre of a storm made from memory, faith, scholarship, and modern hunger. To the ancient world, they belonged within a sacred order of divine authority. To cautious historians, they are part of changing Mesopotamian religious traditions. To fringe imagination, they become hidden architects, starborn rulers, or keepers of a forbidden origin. The ruins do not laugh at any of this. They have heard stranger things from kings, but they also do not confirm what the impatient mind wants confirmed. They offer names, fragments, images, and patterns. They offer the feeling that ancient people knew themselves as part of something vast. They offer the unease of stories where humanity is shaped, assigned, tested, judged, and nearly forgotten. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the great deception was never a single lost truth locked away by ancient hands. Perhaps it was the quiet narrowing of human memory across time. A story becomes doctrine, a doctrine becomes institution, an institution becomes official history. Official history then forgets how many shadows stand behind it. You look toward the horizon. There is no temple lamp now. No priest crosses the courtyard. No scribe presses signs into clay. No king waits for praise. Only the stars remain, and even they do not explain themselves. Above the ruins, the sky feels impossibly old. You understand why ancient people filled it with powers. The stars return with such discipline that they seem less like objects and more like decisions. They move beyond hunger, grief, politics, harvest, and death. Beneath them, human beings build fragile things and call them eternals. The Anunnaki may have been one name for that feeling. The feeling of order above chaos. The feeling that unseen authority stands behind visible life. The feeling that humanity came late to a story already underway. No final answer settles on the mound. Our final answer would be too sharp for a mystery this old. The clay does not give permission for arrogance. The ruins do not reward shouting. They reward patience, careful looking, and the willingness to let uncertainty remain dignified. You breathe slowly in the cooling dark. The deception, if it exists, may still be working whenever people confuse surviving history with complete history. It may be working whenever power dresses itself as destiny. It may be working whenever a culture forgets that its most certain stories were copied by human hands. And yet there is comfort here too. If humanity was made from clay in ancient imagination, then clay also made memory possible. If people were assigned labour, their labour built cities, songs, temples, and archives. If rulers tried to own the past, the broken earth quietly kept other witnesses. No system preserved everything. No system erased everything. That is why the story remains unfinished. The ruins keep breathing beneath the night. The river moves somewhere beyond the dark fields, carrying silt through old channels. Wind passes over the mound and slips through reeds, making a sound like distant speech. It is not an answer. It is only the world continuing. Now the lights grow softer. The questions no longer need to stand upright. Let them settle beside you like dust on a quiet windowsill. Let the ancient plain fade into shadow. The temples sink into moonlight. The tablets rest in their sleeping shelves. The rivers turn slow and silver beneath the patient stars. You do not need to solve the whole hidden timeline tonight. Some mysteries are not doors to force open. Some are deep wells, meant to be approached gently, with respect for the darkness below. The Anunnaki can remain there, half history, half symbol, surrounded by the broken clay and unfinished human longing. Let the ruins become calm now. Let the old kings lose their voices. Let the scribes put down their reeds, and let the priests close the temple doors. Far away, the canals shine faintly in the night, and the air smells of water, dust, and cooling earth. You are safe outside the ancient city, listening as memory loosens its hold. The stars remain above you, quiet and unreachable. The ground remains below you, patient and full of names, and perhaps, somewhere between them, the story of humanity is still being written, not loudly, not completely, but slowly, in fragments of breath, clay, silence, and dream. Good night.